Good evening, everyone. My name is Basil Siokos. I'm the Director of Programming for Doc NYC. I want to thank you all for being here. It gives me great pleasure to welcome the director of the film, James Crump, to the stage. It's a little complicated stage over here. So what a film.
Rock and roll, I feel like Tom Jones.
Exactly. So James, welcome back to Doc NYC. We're very happy to have you back here again.
Thank you, Basil.
Let's talk about this film. I'm curious when you first learned about Antonio Lopez. Was this somebody you knew about for a long time? How did you get to know about him and decide to tell his story?
I became aware of Antonio when I was a kid, like I was a teenager, a young teenager growing up in the Midwest, and it was interview magazines, work with Antonio that resonated with me as a kid. But then, after I finished graduate school, I met Paul Karanikas and began going to the archive, first in Dumbo, then in Jersey City. So it's been a long trip, like 20 years at least. Resonating. The film didn't take that much long to make. And by the way, thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the movie.
So from the time that you decided, okay, I'm now going to make this film, how long have you been working on this particular project?
15 months. Not much time, really, actually. It's production time, but you get obsessed with movie making. So, again, the story, like the films that Ronnie and I are involved with, the things I've been involved with as a filmmaker are like things that they resonate for a long time. I don't think all the projects will be like that. I think this is a kind of a trilogy, the end of a trilogy of projects I've done, which cross over Lower Manhattan and New York City in the late 60s, early 70s.
And could you talk a little bit about, there's such fantastic archival footage here. Talk about sort of the process. It's remarkable that you got it done so quickly, but what was that like? How did you find that material? And talk about the archive of his work that is out there and how you accessed it.
Well, a lot of the material comes from the archive of Antonio and Juan, and Paul was incredible. He gave us, carte blanche to do anything. So supportive, Paul. Thank you much, Paul. Woohoo! But the film relies on so many other archives as well. The Antonio and Juan archive is huge, but we also had to license, I would say several hundred other kinds of things, and also dig up things that are sort of unearth things that are not out there. Like the Warhol film, L'Amour, it's not really in general distribution, but it's a process of research and just digging in and being obsessive, being obsessed and passionate about the story.
And so what I'm just curious, all those fantastic illustrations, all of those, I'm blown away by the photography in particular. Are they available? Are there books? Are they anywhere in print? Are there any plans to put them into wider public circulation?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of monographs on Antonio and Juan, and a lot of the artists who are represented in the movie. The general research would show that, but there's been some great books on Antonio over the years. Paul Karanikas' book, Antonio's, Antonio's People, Antonio's Girls, which precedes that. Many books, and but there's lots more to do. It's a huge archive, and there's lots more to do. We're trying to bring attention to these amazing people who had a story to tell, and it's the beginning, actually. It's kind of the early days of understanding what they were trying to do at that time.
And imagine with the kinds of people that you were able to reach. It seemed like people were so infatuated and so in love with him. Was there anyone that you were surprised said yes so quickly? Were there people that you were really hoping to include that weren't so amenable? If you can talk a little bit about some of the people that were in the film.
I think for me personally, it's Bill Cunningham. I think he was very generous and very open and very. I think Bill really understood that his life was probably not going to be going too much longer, and he was so generous, so forthcoming. We got this call from John, his assistant, John Curtawan, who's here tonight. Thank you, John. And we are on call. We went to the Times building. We were on call with Paul and Ronnie and our crew, and Bill's doing his editing for the Sunday paper, and he just gave it up because he was so generous, and it was a remarkable moment. He put 6 crew members in tears. We had to stop the cameras a few times, and in a way he's the de facto narrator. It's not a narrated film, but in a way Bill's a very special part of the film. But all the interviews were really special. They were special, and we chose the cast really carefully because we could talk to like 1,000
Of course,
people.
yeah.
But we chose people who we thought were like the chief storytellers who were on the scene at that time, who had something meaningful and original to say about Antonio and Juan.
Yeah. What was the most surprising bit of information that you learned about Antonio while making the film?
It's difficult. I mean, I don't know. That he's a sexual addict? I don't know. I mean, I knew he was promiscuous, but come on, Paul. No, I think I learned a lot of things. It has to do with this. It's fluidity. I think Antonio, to me, represents this kind of fluidity that we don't see today, which is a person who can move between and in between worlds. Mm-hmm. And we're all in silos now, and there's an inclusivity and diversity and, you know, kind of a, come on, join this thing we're doing, which in Lower Manhattan at that time was such a mashup of poets, writers, musicians, you know, storytellers, illustrators, fashion people. Today we're all like kind of like in these kind of like distinguished boxes, and I think that's what I learned about that period, which I wasn't able to indulge in myself. I was just born just a few years too late.
Right. I think that clearly there's a lot of people that do know and remember Antonio, but it seems like he's not that well remembered on a sort of broader basis. And so can you talk a little bit of why you think that might be? Why are people not as aware of his work as they might be aware of other like fashion designer work? Illustration is something that maybe is not as understood or well respected as like a designer, clothes designer from that time period. Can you talk a little bit about why you think maybe he wasn't necessarily as brought up within the sort of mainstream of people's understanding about that time period?
Well, I think the film's about discovery. I think there's a lot of things happening with Antonio's legacy and Juan's legacy, but I think it has to do with illustrations being completely, superseded by photography. Mm-hmm. Illustrations on the wane, photography's like on this huge upswing around that time, and Antonio in a way is kind of revitalizing a 19th century earlier practice of illustration, but he's working on the same level as the great image makers like Helmut Newton, Chris von Wangenheim, Guy Bourdin, many others, Avedon, Penn.
Right.
And illustration's sort of being pushed out, but in a way he resuscitates it, brings it back with Juan, and energizes it in a way, and I think that's part of it. But I also think there's like these name brands in fashion is like in this period of time, which I think it's pretty clear, it wasn't about money. It was about creativity, being original, and things changed really quickly after the late 70s. And I think we're going through a period where it's maybe being revitalized. There's a rediscovery of this kind of essence, this spirit. And that's part of why Antonio is not as well known, or Juan is not as well known. But that's changing really quickly, I think. I mean, I think Antonio's on the radar. It's very clear in the fashion world. Designers like, the Kenzo designers, Umberto Leone and Carol M., or Jeremy Scott at Moschino, many others. There's a spirit happening right now, and it's kind of a rediscovery of that. It's not just Antonio, it's a moment, it's a spirit. Right. So I think that's part of it. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. One question I have is a weird one maybe, but within this sort of odd time period we're in now politically, how do you think Antonio would respond to that? What do you think his work would be like at the present moment if he were still around to be within this time period?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's a very good question. I think Antonio and Juan were embracing things that are happening right now. In 2017, we're talking about the year of the trans model, of the inclusivity of the runway, diversity, and so forth, and people are taking credit for that, and which is great. And there's a lot of things happening. The new cover of the British Vogue is like being Instagrammed everywhere, which is fantastic. But Antonio and Juan were embracing and advocating for those kinds of things as early as the mid '60s. Right. So I think it makes the film in a way more timely. And I think Antonio would be thrilled. I think he'd be like playing. I think he'd be doing his thing. I think he was always on top of, a very prescient person on top of what was happening media-wise. I think he would be probably be like an Instagram queen,
Absolutely. I mean, those photos in particular, like the one that's used to illustrate this program in our program, it's just blows me away. It's like one of the best, all those photos, like, you know, with the little behind the scenes of film festivals, when you're putting together a film festival, you're like, what's the best still that I can use, the film image that I can use to promote this film? And for a lot of, no offense to other filmmakers who might be in the room, but like for some films, you're like, oh my God, I need a good film, or a good film still. With this one, I was like, every single still that you sent us was amazing. And it's like, I would show any of these to the audience. I don't know, I agree with you. I think he'd be an Instagram star.
He would be. He would, I think, be thrilled, and we hope that it just does justice to the legacy, the storytelling, and to the spirit of what they represented at that time. It's a time capsule of a movie, and if you like the film, talk about it. You know, share it with people, and it's a real time capsule.
Yeah, absolutely.
We wanted to transport you back to 1970. That was the whole point of the movie. So.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing the film with us, for bringing it to Doc NYC. Thank you so much, James Crump.
Thank you, Basil. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Ciao.